So Idunn was building a storage facility for her sacred apples, and it got so massive that it would be more properly termed as a complex of sorts. But all the Norse dwellings such as this, they need a name, and Idunn became very angry because she couldn't come up with a name. Those creative juices just weren't flowing right, and she damn near had a stroke because she couldn't come up with a name that was, I don't know, apple-plexy. Idunn, the goddess of eternal youth with her sacred apples, suggesting that she may be protecting some kind of sacred tree of life, reminiscent of the one from the Garden of Eden. It is said that she holds the power to the gods' immortality, the secret medicine of the gods. So, who is she? What do we know about her? What can we learn about her from the legends that we have? This is another goddess with only a little information and many questions, so even though there's only a little to explore, there is a lot to discuss. There's only one story that strongly features Idunn, though she is present in another story that we'll get into later. This story is told by Snorri in the Prose Edda, and the setting is cast with the husband of Idunn, Bragi, as he welcomes Eir into the halls of Asgard, and this instills the reciprocity between the gods, as Eir is known to be a host of the gods. Eir and Bragi sit down and exchange drinks and stories. And first among these stories is one of Idunn. The story begins with Odin, Loki, and Honir traveling across mountains and deserts, and they haven't eaten in days. And they find an ox, which they slaughter for the meat. And in cooking the meal, they find that the meat remains raw. And they immediately search for the cause, which turns out to be a massive eagle in a tree nearby using a magical force. It is the Jotun, Thjazi. Thjazi advances a proposal that if they are willing to let him eat his fill, he will allow the cooking pit to function normally, and everyone will get a chance to eat. Now the gods agreed to this, and Thjazi went to claim his portion, consuming what were apparently Loki's favorite parts, the thighs and the shoulders of the ox. Now, this angered Loki significantly, who thought it would be a great idea to attack Thjazi with a giant stick. Now, Thjazi, still an eagle, was knocked back, but grabbed the stick with his talons and started to fly, flailing Loki in tow, dangling behind him. Thjazi, angered at Loki, flew low, dragging Loki's feet across stones and trees with such incredible speed that Loki thought his arms would be pulled from their sockets, and Loki called out, requesting mercy from the eagle who had bested him. Thjazi demanded that Loki swear an oath that he would lure Idunn out from the protection of Asgard, and when Loki agreed to this, he was let free and returned to his companions. Upon arriving home, Loki tells Idunn that he's found a tree in the forest with apples that she would find very interesting, and that she should bring her own apples to compare. And then they go out into the forest together, and lo and behold, there's no tree, there's no apples, there's only Thjazi and his talons, as he kidnaps Idunn and takes her to his lair, deep in the mountains. The gods learn that Idunn is gone as they grow old and wither. They note that she was last seen with Loki leaving Asgard. They question him, threaten him with torture and death, and Loki finally says that he can solve the situation, but he'd have to go to Jotunheim, and he'd have to borrow Freya's cloak with the falcon form, and not to ask any more questions, please, thank you. Freya agrees, and Loki then throws on the cloak, transforming himself into a falcon. Loki then flies to Jotunheim, muttering to himself, no doubt, because he keeps getting himself caught up in these situations. But he finds Thjazi's lair, and he finds that Thjazi has gone out to sea and has left Idunn there alone. A stroke of luck. And Loki transforms Idunn into a nut, and then takes her in his claws, flying away from Jotunheim and then back toward Asgard. Thjazi arrives home and finds his captor is missing, and he is enraged and takes the form of an eagle and chases Loki. the air booming with the flap of his mighty wings, as he is bigger, faster, and far more menacing than Loki's borrowed falcon form. The Aesir can see both of them approaching Asgard as Thjazi hunts Loki to reclaim his prize, and they engineer a fire trap within the walls of Asgard. Loki flies towards the walls and presumably can see this going on, and dives down just before reaching the walls, barely avoiding Thjazi's mighty talons. As Thjazi misses Loki and flies over the walls of Asgard, the Aesir activate their trap, sending a plume of fire against the mighty eagle, setting him aflame and crashing into Asgard. And the Aesir nearby leapt at the opportunity to kill a Jotun who had fallen within their walls and claimed a celebrated victory. Now, this story doesn't reveal much about Idunn because she's fairly passive within the story, but we can look at some of her actions and determine a few things about her character. There are some obvious associations that are already mentioned, that she is a prize among the gods and that she has some connection with their immortality, according to myth. But there is a small moment that's revealed to us when Idunn is appealed to by Loki in order to leave Asgard, and how he convinces her is telling to Idunn's character, because Loki is crafty and therefore considers the motivations of who he's talking to when he tries to manipulate them. In the case of Idunn, he appeals to her curiosity that there are apples to compare with her own. She leaps at the opportunity to make observations and comparisons. This would put her, in my personal opinion, in an association with curiosity and possibly with science and exploration. There's another little moment like this that is revealed in Idunn's other major appearance in myth during the Lokasenna. Now, the Lokasenna is an entry in the Poetic Edda that essentially describes the most awkward of Thanksgiving dinners. Aegir has invited everyone to his hall beneath the waves, and Loki makes his way in and proceeds to insult everybody with little bits of information that he has on them. Sidebar: I'd love to take the Lokasenna to and one of those kind of people that teaches cotillion and just be like, so what's the proper thing to do in this situation? He accuses Bragi of cowardice, and while the two exchange, Idunn advises her husband basically to lay off, that this is a party, STFU. Loki then turns his insults towards Idunn, saying that she is man-crazed, and places her arms around her brother's slayer, implicating Bragi. Idunn holds her ground, saying that she has no interest in getting into a fight with Loki. She has quieted her husband, so she too will remain silent, except to state her love for Bragi. Even though Idunn is again in a passive role in this myth, we still learn from her in her interaction with Loki, yet again, that she knows when to pick a fight and when not to. And she isn't easily affected by insults. And many of the other gods in the story, they fight back against Loki's insults. They try to bring an argument against him, right? But Idunn knows that the best course of action is to just not engage. And it's true that Loki, not getting a reaction, is forced to move on from Idunn and Bragi. So Idunn's very existence actually leads to some interesting questions, because Idunn is relayed as the source of the god's everlasting youth. It's even suggested in another poem, preserved by Snorri in the Prose Edda, that it's Idunn herself, not her apples, that might be the source of this power. This suggests that she's not the guardian of the youth of the gods. She is the youth of the gods. Even her name means ever young. It would follow that her abduction by Thjazi, then, is therefore the scariest moment imaginable for the Aesir. And this actually gets us into a controversy among polytheists around the question of whether or not the gods can die. If they can, it undermines a few things about various views of polytheist philosophy. If they can't, well, what exactly is Idunn? Is she another fertility goddess associated with fruit? Is she some kind of grounding force for life itself, consciousness maybe? There's a number of questions here, all of which are completely unanswerable. I know I hit you guys with unanswerable questions with pretty much every video I do on this stuff, and I half apologize. It's true. There's the it's the nature of the beast, especially when it comes to Norse mythology. There's a lot that's been lost. There's a lot of unanswerable stuff. And I think that it's really cool to identify kind of where those unanswerable questions are to kind of get us thinking about them. I think because they're fascinating and interesting, and they get us to know more about our own practice, our own exploration, and our own spirituality. They are, however, grant you, also very annoying. So let's talk about, what's my personal position? And my personal position is that I don't think the gods can die, despite some of the stories, because I don't know what it would mean for the gods to die. Even Baldur seems to just change locations rather than end in any meaningful way. And even he comes back later. So, but to take this question and put it to an even further test, what happens if Hel, the goddess of death, dies? Do things stop dying? Does everything dead come back to life? Is she already dead? I have no idea, but I imagine that all hell would break loose. Anyway, let me know what y'all think down in the comments. It's an interesting little philosophical quandary that has more consequences than people typically think about. Maybe I'll make a video kind of exploring the subject later, but I want to hear what y'all's thoughts are. Whatever the case, there are questions of identity surrounding Idunn that are brought up by scholars on the subject. Some hold that she might be an imported goddess from the Celts. Now, there is an Irish legend called the Sons of Tuirenn, which bears certain resemblances to Idunn's abduction in the Prose Edda. The story includes a set of impossible tasks set by Lu against the sons of Tuirenn to pay off the life debt for killing his father. Now, among these tasks is to retrieve 3 apples associated with healing from a sacred garden. The sons of Tuirenn turn themselves into hawks to capture the apples and are chased by the daughters of the garden, who transform into fire-breathing griffins to chase them. The similarities are pretty apparent. There's the hawks, there's the chase, there's the apples, there's fire, there's the healing association. It's a very interesting little parallel, but the story doesn't contain a clear cognate for Idunn, just a point of possible inspiration. Another interesting parallel for Idunn is found in the Netherlands. Idunn may bear some resemblance to Nehelenia, a deity largely of unknown history that's depicted in several public altars, usually with a basket of either like apples or loaves and sometimes even ship parts, and alongside a dog. This could possibly associate Idunn with dogs, but historically this may be a stretch, given that their only connection is this basket that doesn't always contain apples. The deity has been noted as possibly connected to Freya, to Frigg, Nerthus, and finally Idunn. Now, if you want my opinion on a few things, especially given my position that I don't think the gods can die, my personal view of Idunn is one that also has a lot of questions. I think the idea of her as this grounding force for life, or something like consciousness, is a really interesting concept. The implication in myth of her position as one who sustains the gods, or possibly even existence, is one to be acknowledged and considered. This would place her, though, as an ancient deity, possibly older than Odin. However, she would be, as her name suggests, ever young. The apples kind of associate her with healing, so I think that she's one that could be prayed to along with Eir for that purpose. And another thing that I see out of Idunn, given my personal observations in the stories, is that I see her as associated with curiosity, and possibly then as a goddess of science. The way that Loki convinces her to leave Asgard kind of sticks with me. It's how one would trick a botanist out of the house. Like, hey, Idunn, I want you to go to the forest with me. Yeah, there's this really neat plant that you've never seen, I swear. And yeah, you'll want to bring samples to compare. So gather your apples, and we're going to go out into the forest outside of the safety of the walls. This is a great idea. No. Ignore the eagle. Don't worry about that. Oh, God, you're gone. I have a sneaky suspicion that Idunn, if we consider her kind of like a goddess related to science, would probably look at these empirical experiences with Loki and conclude at least that hanging out with him is risky. But those are just my thoughts. Let me know yours. My perspective on Idunn isn't the only one. This goddess is surrounded by far more questions than answers. And I'm sure that some of y'all have UPG or SPG around Idunn that give you a little bit of perspective. Or perhaps something that I said got you to think on Idunn a little bit more. Definitely let me know in the comments down below. But with that, hail to my patrons for making this content possible. It's good to have people at your back. Be sure to like, subscribe, and, well, I've kidnapped the bell. You can't ring it. Not even if you try, don't do it. I kidnapped it, and you can't ring it. And remember to find a way or make one. And now I'm in the forest by myself and talking to myself. That's chaos divinity.